but she's been in telecom, financial services, aerospace, IT sectors. So many sectors she has been in, always flying high, probably because of her stint in Boeing. I think you were in Boeing also, right? So she's a fantastic person, holds an extensive experience in all these areas, and has, in telecom itself, worked in a very focused area in many areas when she was with Ericsson and other assignments. She's worked in the areas of technology, PR, advertising, and she has a postgraduate degree in business management and a postgraduate degree in international management from Brussels, as well as a Bachelor of Arts from University of Pune. I'll be going to her with a question. She's being from Sterlite Technologies and from the fiber optics industry, for which I have a special affinity. So I have to state that as also the reason for this question. India is very deficient in fiber connectivity. We all know that. So having gone into this matter in depth, and in the context of what BBNL is doing, BharatNet is doing, 5G happening, what do you think are the best options and choices before the government and the industry? And how can private sector help to attain the ambitious targets of the next billion, or at least the next 700, with true broadband? Because mobile broadband will be great, but we know it cannot be for very heavy duty transactions. It has got certain challenges on spectrum. So if you want to go for real, true broadband, you need fiber. That's our limited understanding. So what do you think should be done? And what do you think is a potential for India to play a lead role in this industry?
Thank you so much, TV. And this is an area that, not only fiber optics, but even the affordable broadband and the rural environment is something that's very close to my heart. And the reason behind that is, if you look at where the real demand is coming from, much unlike what the stats say, the real demand will come from our rural environment because, the fact remains is that they are not used to the past way of engaging, which is take your books, read a book, then go onto the internet, go onto data in a specific way. They don't think like that. The real disruption and the real value will come from rural because I suspect they're going to surprise the hell out of the entire world. They are going to utilize, the way they will utilize data, which in our limited understanding would be a video intensive environment, but a lot more in terms of business models and how they're going to engage with the network is going to become a case study which will create history. So there are no two ways about the fact that the 60% of the rural environment of India is actually going to define how internet is going to be used. Now, keeping that context in mind, therefore, I think the government has taken the right steps in terms of ensuring that the rural environment is rightly, has enough of fiber. And I would actually suggest going forward, if there is any scope in policy, that there is scope to increase the fiber count and the quality of standards in the laying of the network into the rural environments, because so there are two aspects, right? Once we ensure that the bandwidth is future-proof for the next 40 years, and standards in the deployment of the network is such that it remains, robust and scalable for the next 40 years. So if these two aspects are kept in mind, then I suspect the rural population of India is actually going to define India's leadership in the future. And just one thought to Kevin and Microsoft, so to say. I have very high regard for what Microsoft can do in the rural environment, and I suspect that your role in the way the rural population is going to utilize and adapt the internet is going to be significant, and the whole local adaptation is big. I'd also like to actually put in a point towards the CSE, which I'm so impressed with. The quality of people in the CSE, including folks like Abhishek Singh and others. I have never seen anyone, a team that is so passionate and has got a cause that is way beyond their scope, so to say, and they're doing a brilliant job. So first of all, those are...
You would like to elaborate on CSE for foreign years.
Okay.
What is CSE? Expand on it.
Yeah, so sir, would you want to also actually touch upon CSE?
You please touch.
Okay. The Central Service Center under the Ministry...
Common Service Center.
Common Service Center under the Ministry of IT. And a great pride of India in the sense that they are going to be rolling out services in the Gram Panchayats or the rural, into the villages, where they're capturing in a very high scale the local talent towards education, health, and what have you. And I would believe that the private sector, if there are ways to also actually partner with such government bodies, would actually utilize their network and scale and actually take it to a completely different level. Of course, one is that, and secondly, of course, enough of us can enter into the rural environment and create similar, in a smaller group, similar such networks. Sterlite Technology is starting or initiating something called as GARV, and the whole idea of GARV is to create again village environments that can easily adapt local talent to come in, maybe in the health, education, entertainment, women empowerment and what have you, in all these areas, including just e-governance. For us, it is really not a business model. It is really about tapping how the broadband network can really work and enable, as a part of our sustainable CSR is really trying to create a profitable business environment to capture this disruptive move that we have no clue how it's going to turn. But we all suspect it's going to be a tsunami, right? So that is one thing that I like to put across in terms of what we see as value, which is coming our way from the rural environment. And therefore, the quality of the infrastructure plays a very big role. I touched upon very briefly on standards and deployment standards, and even the optical fiber, the scope of increasing the count of optical fiber into these networks. But I think one thing I must commend, and therefore put up the challenge, I must commend that the Indian government is almost touching Guinness Book of World Record, both in terms of scale of the rollout of the BharatNet, or the rural network for the folks from outside. I'm sure if you know BharatNet, right? Yeah, sure, just checking. Okay, so that is, I mean, it is such an ambitious program, and being one of the partners, we know that our entire company and many like us are seeped into ensuring BharatNet is successful. Another part that is commendable to the government is the very aggressive and assertive push on the timelines to ensure that this rolls out, right? But that also has certain challenges, and as a partner to the government, we can very safely say that there is one area, if addressed, would really support the pace and the fast rollout of BharatNet, and that is, while we are doing something so futuristic, we still operationally have a very large number of approvals that is required to move kilometer to kilometer when we are rolling out something of such scale. So I think there is scope to redefine the way approvals, and we have actually done some research on it. We have about, we could potentially have about some 30 odd approvals to 40 approvals in the operational rollout of fiber, which can easily come down to about 6 with the use of technology to ensure that the standards, the depth and the breadth of optical fiber can actually be addressed. So the suggestion is, we all have a very, very ambitious goal, and keeping the national flag, flying high. I think the industry is pushing beyond just business to ensure that that's done. And the request from the government would be that let's address operational challenges where we can in increasing the rollout. So approvals is one of them. The other aspect is really in terms of, therefore, from ensuring that the scale of BharatNet is so huge and the nation is so huge. Therefore, just the cash flow challenges, because we really want to be in the forefront of everything. So just on-time cash flow, just constantly moving when we're getting into government businesses and government payments and stuff like that. We know the intent is strong, but they are, again, legacy-driven, payment cycles and legacy-driven operational cycles, which again can get addressed, because our goal is to ensure that India becomes that disruptive force for the world, and very soon we can show the light to the world as to what really is possible with broadband network. So, long story short, that's really what I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Swati. I think that was a very good contribution. And I fully, in particular, I can understand and sympathize. Government has got excellent intentions and policies, but because of the system and the way the bureaucracy works there, the delays in payment, for example, can kill a small unit. And if you're going to see small entrepreneurs come up in rural areas and all that, unless that aspect is addressed, I don't think we'll be able to get the true blossoming of all those things. So that's one. And number two, I would like to also state that, sir, with your kind permission, at the end of the discussion, we have our official rapporteur-in-chief here, who's excellent in reporting, and even if you don't have video recording, you'll have everything there, which is Mr. Debashish Bhattacharya. So we would like to come back to you at the end of the day, later with our written submissions, notes, so that as an aide memoire for you for assisting us in this. That's a brief aside. And welcome, Chandra. Thanks. Our next panelist, whom I'm going to call upon to talk in a slightly different area than telecom, is going to be Mr. Daniel Fogg. Mr. Daniel Fogg is the Chief Operations Officer, Buffalo Grid. We're very happy to have him here. It's going to be a great thing to listen to him. Buffalo Grid is the mobile power and internet service for the off-grid world. Buffalo Grid is on a mission to connect the next billion with using solar energy, innovative technology, and a cashless payment system to provide power as a service where it's needed most. You might all be wondering why in this affordable broadband connectivity and rural we are having him. As you all know, without that nothing will happen, no penetration will happen in the rural areas. So helping them to integrate into the global economy. It's a solution with a hub, a cloud, and an agent. And using the Buffalo Grid hub cloud platform and agent network, services are delivered into towns and villages to help customers get connected and stay connected. Agents are selected to make sure they are located in areas where Buffalo Grid can have the biggest impact. And I'm sure India has to be one of your prime target areas from what we know of our villages. So Buffalo Grid Hub, free of charge, is provided to the agents at the training and the support they need. I will not go more into it. I would rather let Mr. Fogg talk to us. The question that I wish to address to him is, given the fact that most of our areas lack access to reliable power, which is at the heart of the connectivity solution, this is a major challenge for rural areas. In fact, even in our towers and all which we have there, it's a fantastic problem, because you have to have double, triple redundancy to keep the towers running, mobile towers running. And that, as you know, adds tremendously to the cost. On the one hand, we talk of affordable access. On the other hand, we are knowingly adding costs. because of the lack of availability of grid power. So how do they get their smartphones charged? I may get coverage, everything. I may have double generator, triple generator as a backup. But once I put the smartphone in the hand of the villager, how will he get it charged? So that's a big problem. What are the plans that you would have or like to recommend for getting their devices charged and connected to the network? And what are the plans to help get the next billion to stay connected, get connected and stay connected? And most of the next billion will be from India. So we would look forward to your kind remarks on this.
I have one question, which is the name. Why Buffalo?
Sorry, yes. Why Buffalo Grid? Buffaloes are large, friendly, powerful animals, which people in rural areas around the world rely on. And I think that's one of the reasons we chose the name Buffalo. It was also quite trendy to stick an animal in your company name at the point when Buffalo Grid was formed. So yeah, that's the reason. Thank you very much for inviting me here today, and it's been very interesting hearing everyone's address so far. There's a common misconception around grid power and off-grid power provision, which, despite us ourselves using it to describe Buffalo Grid, that we provide off-grid power, I just thought it's kind of worth kind of letting you guys in on. So we tend to look at the grid in a very binary way. There's either grid power or there's no grid power, on-grid or off-grid. And within that, you might think that this building, for example, is fully on-grid. And by that we mean you get 24/7 power and you have easy access to it. And then the other end of the spectrum, of course, is you're off-grid. So you don't have any power at all, there's no connection to the grid, you get zero power and you have to rely on other means. But actually, the reality in India and also in sub-Saharan Africa, where the problem is also quite severe, is much more complicated than that. And we use this term, there are many different terms people use to describe what I'm about to go into and what our primary focus as a business is this thing called the grid edge. So it's this bit in the middle, basically, where, let's say, I'll give you a perfect example. By the government of India's own standards, there might be a village which is considered on-grid. And what that means is that grid power cables are provided into the village. There is provision of power into the village centre, into the Gram Panchayat, and into 10% of homes within that village. That says nothing about the 90% of other homes within the village which don't have grid power connectivity. And it doesn't say anything about the amount of power and the duration of that power's availability throughout the day. So what we've actually found is we've visited actually well over 100 villages now, both in southern India and northern India. And we've found that on-grid villages often don't have enough power to allow people to keep their phones charged. So that's kind of the first thing I say. We estimate that there are over 700 million people living in India that live in areas that we would consider the grid edge. When you add to that over 250 million people who live off-grid, that's nearly a billion people that live without regular, reliable, stable access to power. So just to go back on that one more time, I'm not saying that there are that many villages which are not connected to the grid. I'm saying the grid power provision is not enough to ensure regular, stable, reliable access to power. So why does that matter in the context of a smartphone? Well, there's a gentleman over here and he seems to have plugged his phone into a charge bank, and yet we're in a fully on-grid area. And the reason for that is because all of us, no matter where we live in the world now, are increasingly reliant on the global communications infrastructure to stay connected to the modern economy. We need our smartphones. And even if they're not smartphones, we need our basic phones. We need to be able to communicate with people, whether it's friends, family, or business colleagues. In more extreme cases, we need to be able to do banking transactions, or we need to be able to WhatsApp people, or we need to search for some information on the internet or watch a video to help us understand something we're engaged in. So we rely on these devices, and they help us connect to the internet. So it's kind of, and Kevin touched on this briefly, but it's important to kind of consider what you need to connect to the internet. So you need three things, and some of these are quite obvious. but perhaps some less so. So the first thing is you need a device. Increasingly, and especially in India, that's a smartphone. Now, the access to devices is actually getting a lot better. So there's a lot of pull from consumers because these are extremely powerful devices. You can do a lot with them, and they're extremely cheap. And there's a lot of push from manufacturers. The consumer electronics ecosystem in Shenzhen, and as the chairman mentioned at the beginning, also in India, although smaller, is putting amazing devices into the hands of consumers, which make the iPhone X look like an extravagant device, when for $50 you can pick up an amazing Android phone and do pretty much everything you can do on an iPhone X as well. I know this gentleman's got one next to me, so I apologize for talking about that. So the devices are everywhere. Increasingly, they're within reach of the large majority of Indians, especially even in rural areas. Then you need connectivity. So if you're accessing the internet through a smartphone, you need mobile data connectivity. Well, I'm sure everyone here is more than aware of what Reliance Jio has been doing in the market for the last couple of years. Regardless of the impact that's had on the market and potential long-term concerns for if a monopoly is developed in that market, regardless of that, for consumers, data provision has become more widely available, and the price of that data connectivity has dropped to the floor. So that means that there is increasingly available, cheap data, and people have devices. But if you can't charge that device, and you can't charge that device regularly, you have a big problem. So if some of you can remember the days when we had Nokia feature phones, maybe 5-10 years ago for some of us, those phones were very reliable. The battery would last for 3, maybe 4 days, and you didn't have to charge it that regularly. Some of the most advanced smartphones in the world now still struggle giving you more than 10 hours power at a time, which means that you have to charge it not just every day, but sometimes multiple times a day. If you then add on the use of high data services and services which use the screen a lot, like YouTube, for example, which, as has been mentioned a few times here, is going to be very popular in rural India because of the high illiteracy rate, that means that basically your battery burn is going to go up. So if you're using your data a lot, which it looks like people will do, and you're using video a lot, your battery burn is going to go up, and it's going to go up a lot faster. Point here is pretty simple. Access to reliable, stable, and affordable power wherever you are is a key factor for making sure that you can stay connected to the internet. And that's essentially what our mission at Buffalo Grid is. There's something that we've kind of found over the last couple of years about power provision, which is that originally we thought that Buffalo Grid would be focused on a necessity a necessity use case. So therefore, I don't have access to power. I need Buffalo Grid in order to stay connected. But what we found is it's actually more complicated than that. It's as much about convenience as anything else. It's as much about having access to power where I am, and then allowing me to connect to the internet, and less about. So as a result, that's where the off-grid, the grid edge point that I made earlier becomes really important. So essentially, that's just a kind of run through of why we think mobile phone power is really important, and why we think that in order to connect the next billion, we need to make sure that there is availability pretty much everywhere. So that's why we designed the Buffalo Grid Hub. It's a solar-powered, internet-connected box. We have also spent a bunch of time thinking about the business model through which we offer this box. In the last couple of months, we started selling the Buffalo Grid Hub now. We sell to telcos and rural banks, banking inclusion networks. They purchase the technology outright. They place the hub with their trusted agent in either a village or a tier 4 city, and then the agent sells services to customers from the hub. Now, today those services are mobile phone power, but the hub has been designed as a platform so that internet connectivity and access to services through the 9-inch touchscreen can be provided into the village as well. So, and one of the reasons we've done this is essentially it takes the asset costs off the agent and off the villager. So if you want to charge your phone, we don't think you should have to spend a couple of $100 to stick a solar panel on the roof of your house. We think you should just be able to spend a few rupees, charge your phone, pay as you go, and then go about your business. It also means that the agent doesn't have to incur the cost for the technology as well. And by ensuring that we're a direct, we provide a system that allows direct-to-consumer sales, it means that the hub becomes a revenue generator for the telco and for the bank. So, in short, the customer gets an affordable, cheap service which they can use whenever they like. The agent gets a means to generate revenue, in some cases doubling their income on a monthly basis, and the telco or the rural bank adds another service onto their into their line of products, as well as driving engagement with their brand due to regular interactions from consumers. So that's essentially a run through of why mobile power is important to connectivity and what we're doing to solve it.
Sorry. Oh, I didn't put it on. My fault. We are running slightly behind schedule, but I think it's interesting, and I look forward to the audience interactions after this. Our next panelist is Mr. Shailendra Kumar Singh. We are very fortunate to have him here. He is the co-founder and CEO of Shaildar Telecom. Excellent experience in NGN, VoIP, and VAS technologies. Well-versed in various technologies, telecom technologies like switching, wireless access, etc. And he established Shaildar Telecom Services to provide professional services to the telecom industry. With the rapid growth of the industry, performance demand has been increasing and the need for specialized technical resources. And so from Shaildar, they are committed to provide broadband service in areas which are not well connected. For us, quality of service at an affordable price is that critical factor. Shaildar is an effort to create a platform to provide specialized value-based services and products to service providers, as well as to end customers, which help them reduce cost and increase efficiency. With operations in beautiful Meghalaya and Assam, Shaildar is partnered with Facebook, Railtel, Tenda Technology, and Cambium for providing wireless communication solutions in the Northeast. Against that background, you would not be surprised at the question which we are going to throw at him. Since you have been involved, sir, in setting up rural connectivity in the projects and done a lot of excellent work in the Northeast, could you please share with us the great operational challenges you have faced in that area, unique ones, and how they were addressed, and how one can successfully operate a network and maintain it there? Thank you, sir.
Actually, before that, I'd just like to introduce the company itself. We've got two operations. One is we're running an ISP service in Meghalaya, presently limited to 3 cities. And apart from that, we work with the railways, the Railtel. We manage their rail wire broadband services across the northeastern region. Again, introduction to the Northeast, because I think a lot of people sitting in Delhi don't really understand the region. And 3 years ago, when we actually started operations there, it was a land of discovery, really, because the challenges there are completely different from what we've seen in the rest of the country. The terrain is one big challenge that we always face. The second is it's a bandwidth scarce region. If, let's say, I want to take ingress bandwidth from company A or B, they would probably offer it to me at a price here and maybe charge 50% premium in those regions. So here we're talking about affordable broadband services with a handicap of bandwidth being available at a different price. BharatNet has been trying to propagate there, but I think there are challenges in the deployment itself, because in a hilly terrain particularly, underground deployment is a challenge, and we've actually faced this in Railwire. We had actually gone live in Silchar, and last monsoon was such that the whole railway line got washed out. So the entire fiber just vanished. And I think now there have been decisions taken to actually do OPGW and ADSS cables, so at least the reliability level would be better addressed. The second, I think everyone has the same problem of power. In most other places, people would actually go with solar as a backup. But in our region, because of the huge monsoon period, for 3 months, you hardly get the sun. So that also becomes a different challenge. In fact, when we did a deployment in Meghalaya, in the city of Shillong, we've got about 150 hotspots live today. It was really quite a challenge, although we can take power from the grid. So our access points are mounted on the electrical poles itself. But then there is no 24/7 power available. So if I want to run a service which is 24/7, I need to actually have a mix of grid power and a backup. Conventional batteries are so heavy that you cannot mount them on the pole. So we did some indigenous development, ultimately did not really work. We're still in that process of actually putting up a lithium-ion battery with a UPS on the pole side itself, which is comparatively lightweight and can actually take up the backup requirements. Availability of manpower is another big challenge in the region. If I look at Meghalaya itself, we actually scanned around the universities, the technology universities, and we found that every student was actually from the north of India. So whether it be electronics and communications or computer sciences degrees, it's primarily people from the north. We only found one gentleman in a diploma institute who was local, and we hired him. So again, the good part about it is Assam has a large resource base, so we're able to ping from there. But then structurally, the way the region is, for instance, in Meghalaya, it's a very tribal sensitive region, so an outsider is treated as an outsider. Even though I have a license in Meghalaya, I'm still treated as an outsider. We plan to go to Mizoram next, where we'll probably face the same situation. But the interesting, it's the reason again why we looked at that market and really went there. I would call it the opportunity market, because not enough has been done. Here we're talking about rural broadband. I think even in the urban areas, we have narrowband rather than broadband. So when we actually started delivering 5 Mbps and 10 Mbps as bandwidth to the end customer, there was a complete sea change in terms of their reaction itself. So even on our hotspots, we are actually delivering more than 5 Mbps to an individual device. When we come to the Railtel Railwire scenario, when we started 3 years ago, most of our fixed broadband customers were actually looking at the 1 Mbps and the 2 Mbps packages. Interestingly, today in 3 years' time, they moved to the 25 Mbps and the 50 Mbps, and the demand is now for 100 Mbps as well. In terms of the content, we talk in mainland India, we talk about 28 languages or thereabouts. You'd be surprised there are 100 languages spoken in Northeast itself. So if we are actually talking about creating content in that local language, the business case is just not there. So if we did an interesting project. Of course, it didn't go into a pilot stage. With the Nagaland government, there was this fund they had from NEGD to do a localized project. So we were talking about doing a pilot project in 5 villages, in an e-village concept. But first thing we realized was power availability was a big problem. So we had to actually put a 1 kV grid there from solar in order to power not only our devices, but also the handsets of people. So that was fun. The second thing is we've got into connectivity. So Wi-Fi provides a decent connectivity. And there is enough content available from a user standpoint. So for instance, most of the states in that region are heavily dependent on agriculture. And we realized that there is a very good farm.gov.in by the government of India, which has very localized information. But it is again available in those 28 languages, which have no meaning there for the rural mass. So we said we should actually develop an app so that he can actually see visually and interact with the content that is available. And that, I mean, those kind of localized solutions do definitely help. And again, when we are talking about BharatNet, I think possibly BharatNet needs to be broken down into segments. Each area has its own unique requirements. So if those can be addressed. last mile even otherwise. The other thing is, as a federal structure, the central government can do something, but until unless the state government and the local municipality or the local township, there's a very interesting concept in the northeast, particularly in Meghalaya, where you have the headman. So the MLC doesn't have value, but the headman does. I need my clearances for my NOCs. I need to go to the headman, and the headman actually has to go to all the neighbors, get their NOCs. And then there is a myth. In 2006, Northeastern University had published a paper on wireless technologies and their challenges. So because of that paper, most of the headmen don't want to take a decision. So there are a lot of places which are unserved because I cannot put up a site there. Again, in terms of using, there is a proper process that the Meghalaya Electricity Power Corporation allows you to use their poles to lay fiber or Cat6 or access points as well. But then there is a differentiation. I pay a lakh a kilometer for a year, whereas a cable operator pays 25 rupees per pole. So automatically, my low-cost exercise goes for a toss. So if we add up all these various scenarios, there are challenges. But again, I think in the long run, there's lots which can be done. There is a huge demand. But again, if the cost of bandwidth itself is going to be quite substantial because I can't lay my own infrastructure. If I lay my own infrastructure, I'm completely outpriced. So if I take it from Vodafone or anyone else, there is a challenge there as well because, for instance, in RailTel, for 10 years during last year during the October-November period, the entire fiber was down. So we had actually no services in the Northeast for 10 full days. So again, I think there is another option being built through Bangladesh, but it was supposed to be done 2 years ago. It's still on the anvil. And not only Northeast, but also Bhutan has the same problem because Bhutan is also served through the same grid itself. They come through the same fiber lines itself. So both on the ingress bandwidth, on the trunk routes, as well as at the local levels, I think a lot of work still needs to be done. A lot is being done. For instance, CSC was mentioned here. I don't know whether people know about something called Railwire Sathi, where the Indian Railways has a plan of actually having a Wi-Fi hotspot on each railway station managed by a local entrepreneur who would then start doing other services as well. For instance, Aadhaar verification or any other verifications could be done at the local level, any documentation collection. Even companies like Flipkart and Amazon are actually trying to use it for local deliveries now. So the kind of potential that is there is enormous. It has to be targeted in the right fashion. Again, I heard from Swati about CSR. The problem is, I think a lot of CSR work is being done, but again in silos.